to suppose that because the best thing we can imagine is some kind of conscious designer, that it is a conscious designer. That because to us the best analogy we can think of for the universe is some kind of like, you know, a clockwork mechanism or some forth, that it needs a divine watchmaker. This is just not science at all. And, you know, Hume could argue with that without going to any of the technical debates that came later, and we should be able to see that basic point now.
Okay, I want to ask one more question before I go out to you, which is, Julian suggested something along the lines of science studies, where you looked at perhaps different views on science, which maybe might be a place for creationism or ID. What do people think about that? Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for studying the philosophy, and I mean, there was an article that Dave has written, and he touches on something which I thought was quite interesting, where he talks about a response, the fact that the Discovery Institute, talking about the USA and others in the USA, are actively promoting an attack on science, and its materialist philosophy should not scare us. Now, I'm not arguing about the science. I'm arguing about the materialist philosophy. Now, that is a method that you assume in order to do science. And that is a method, it's methodological naturalism. It's not necessary for doing science, because many scientists who do not hold that philosophical position, they do the same science. They sit beside you, they'll do the same science. But it's the context within which they do science. When you refer to the science that you're doing, and you bring in that philosophy, at that point, there are other scientists, historically and today, who have a different worldview, and that worldview deserves to be represented. It doesn't impact the science, it impacts the context in which you do science.
Well, they have a different worldview, but they don't have a different means of practice. You know, because science, we often make the mistake of thinking of science as a body of knowledge, when science is in fact merely a method. So it doesn't really matter what you believe while you're practicing science, as long as you don't allow those beliefs to prejudice your observations and your deductions from that. But I don't think that it's any kind of evidence that there's a reason to change how we practice science, or that to make out that a purely materialist perspective is in some way prejudicial, because science is about the study of the natural world, of what we can observe and what we can infer.
Yeah, I'd like to come back on that, actually, the science science is a method, but today science is defined in such a way that only nature is allowed. It's only matter and energy are the only sufficient explanations for everything we have. Now that is restrictive, whereas we're arguing, I think, Alec and myself, that we should open that wide and say, why cannot we allow a supernatural explanation for something we observe? Why is that prohibited just because science is defined as nature only? Well, it didn't used to be nature only. When Newton studied science, he said he was thinking God's thoughts after him. Now, why is that not a good scientific method?
Dave?
Fine, he was thinking God's thoughts because he was working out what God must have done if he existed. That's great. So if God existed, I've cracked it. So I am God. That's the point. Okay? And you know, Stephen Hawking's the same thing. The fact is that we have worked out the mind of God. So who needs God? Right? So it's like, I just, you know, your argument doesn't stand up. But the point about materialist philosophy, I think, is a sort of kind of a bit disingenuous, because I would turn it around the other way and say that for everybody who has faith and who deals in science, somewhere along the line they make a compromise where my beliefs and my understanding of science can't mix. And this is a really important thing. And this is kind of where I kind of respect what Michael Rice was on about. Because I teach a lot of Muslim children, and they do science. They like science a lot culturally because they want professions, engineers, doctors, and the rest of it. But they come up against the fact that their Muslim teaching, their teaching of their religion, says one thing and science says another. And they literally ask me, "What do you think, sir?" Right? And I have to tell them, you have to decide where you draw this line, because you cannot have your abhorrence of evolution and study biology at the same time. So you decide where it is you draw the line. And similarly, if you want to put God in before the Big Bang, that's fine by me. But at least you have to accept that what we've understood by science and cosmology is what we're studying. And that's the dilemma that I think that people have. And it's quite possible to be a scientist and to have faith, because you as a person, as an individual, draw the line somewhere yourself. You can't tell someone where to do that, and I would never do it.
People who hold that there is no God, equally, they will have to decide where they draw the line. And they will look at certain things that may lead them to conclude that perhaps there is something beyond this. Dawkins, in his book The Blind Watchmaker, he says when you first look at biology, it looks like you're looking at things that have been designed for a reason, but obviously he doesn't hold that position. So there's a reaction, and your worldview will determine where you draw the line, whether you choose to accept that conclusion or not. So again, what you've said to me, I can turn it around again. So it's on these issues of philosophy. Wherever one view is presented, present the other view. You do the science. As I said, these science textbooks, you flip through page after page, and there's no disagreement.
Julian, and then I'm going to take the audience. You will have many times to come back, but I do have to get them in.
To that point,
go on.
It was just to say if there's a 2 points of view, would it therefore be fair to say that when we're teaching history of the Second World War, we should teach the Holocaust denial version alongside the version that we normally get taught, because these are 2 points of view. These are two, we call into question how we're teaching history by doing so, or is it the case that one of these is entirely supported by evidence and the other isn't?
How many people statistically respond, for belief in God, for example? Talk about that.
Yeah, okay, well, a couple of brief things. First of all, the worldview point. Of course your worldview affects how you see things, but on this particular issue we can see quite clearly, as I mentioned earlier, that people with a religious worldview and people with a non-religious worldview seem to be capable of looking at the facts together and deciding evolution is true and so forth. It's only people who have the religious worldview who seem to reach the opposite conclusion. So that's one case where the influence of the worldview is not symmetrical. And this goes to the second point, which I want to stress this thing about my desire to teach science studies. Please God, please God, who isn't not there, not there. Sorry, who's probably not there? Who's probably not there? Thank you. Not in this kind of like, well, some people think this, so some people think that. What do you think, kids? Kind of thing. That's awful. You teach different debates. You don't have to sort of pretend everything's balanced. So that's the first thing there. But then going back to this point, why not the supernatural? Why can't the supernatural be part of science? Well, it can in a way. I think it would be bad. And I think some people do make the mistake sometimes of saying that, you can't, anything which postulates forces which are currently not understood by science or outside science can't be science. That's too restrictive. But then if you want those things done, you have to show they're there. So, for example, if you believe in extrasensory perception or things like that, if you could do experiments which show they're real, then that's fine. If you believe that homeopathy works through strange effects and you can show that through tests, that's fine. If you think that God is supernatural forces are intervening, do the test, that's fine. The only thing I'd say is that every time someone has attempted to do such tests, so far they've always ended in complete failure, which should at least give us some indication of where we should prioritise our research funding. But sure, do not rule out. It obviously would be ideological to rule out completely the possibility that forces are at work in this universe which are outside the current remit of science. But we're not saying that.
Okay, they could talk for ages. I've got a man here. We've got a microphone. You'll notice we're being filmed. We're very lucky. Somebody's going to put it on the internet for us afterwards. So please speak into the mic.
I'm Dabir Tehrani from Humanist Society of Scotland. Originally from Iran and originally Muslim. The question I have is a layman's question. When we talk about teaching creationism at schools, are we talking about teaching the divine creator who sent Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and some other thousands of statues in India to represent him? And is that we are going to teach children about the divine creator who brings hurricanes, earthquakes, bushfires, and creates a lot of disaster for people, and states that we are doing this to you because your parents and ancestors have sinned? Are we going to teach about the divine creator who sends rules to people how to live, how many wives to marry? A creator who says women are worth half the men. A creator who appears in form of statues, of wooden statues and stones in India. Are we going to teach about those? If the answer is no, we are not going to teach about that sort of divine creator. And the divine creator is not really divine. There is a creator who is natural, material, physical, then I have no problem teaching about material origin of the universe. I have no problem. But if you are going to teach about the divine creator who had those properties that I listed, then I would say we should not teach, we should not even tell them that, oh, you can make your mind the way it is. I would bring to them all the facts of both sides of religion and atheists and give the weakness and the strength of each and tell them why the divine creator does not exist.
Okay, can I see who else? Yes, we'll go to you, and then we'll go to you. So if you go next.
One of the questions that's been raised is what's wrong with belief in a creator in scientific methodology? And I would suggest that the answer to that is falsifiability. We heard the point about if the fossil rabbit was found in the Precambrian, okay, evolution's wrong. Can the creationists or the intelligent design people point to something and say, if that was found, okay, then we admit we're wrong? If they can't do that, it seems to me it isn't science, and it could be taught as part of religious studies or world myth or something, but it isn't actually science. I suspect that creationism has been suborned by the prestige of science. It's trying to take a view which isn't actually scientific and get it accepted as science because then it thinks it will get more prestige. And I suspect that that actually is behaving in bad faith. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir. Then I'll come to you, and then I'll come to you.
I'd like to say just a few words about the notion of the worldview. I read a book a few years ago, an old book by Italia called The Elizabethan Worldview, which gave descriptions of the Elizabethan view of the spheres and so on. Now, much of that has since been discredited. We no longer have that kind of worldview. But the point is that the Elizabethans, because they couldn't explain things in scientific terms, resorted to metaphor. My point is that there are still a lot of things that we don't understand, and religion becomes the metaphor. And it should be taken in that kind of view, that we make the distinction about the things that we teach our children that are provable, but we use metaphor to explain what we don't yet know. And that's everything from through the myths, the pre-Christian, the Roman stories, that are all very interesting, but they're metaphor for things that we no longer, we don't understand. And if we progress and we actually substitute or we learn more